I want to try a little experiment to kick things off.
Sure.
A sort of visualization exercise. I want you to close your eyes, unless you're driving, obviously. Please don't do that. And I want you to conjure up the most quintessentially British image you can possibly imagine. Just the absolute peak of Britishness. What comes to mind?
I suspect for most people, we're looking at a kind of montage. You know, red double-decker buses, maybe a cricket match on a village green, rainy afternoons, and tea. Lots and lots of tea.
Right, exactly. Or a bulldog draped in a Union Jack.
Yeah.
But sitting right at the top of that pile, the ultimate symbol, the
Yeah.
logo of the nation really has to be the royal family.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the Queen's face on the banknotes. It's the balcony of Buckingham Palace. It's the changing of the guard. They are the brand. They represent the very soul, the continuity of the entire nation.
That's the idea, isn't it? The monarchy is presented as this timeless, immovable rock. The message is that governments change, prime ministers come and go, fashions change, but the crown endures. It's like woven into the limestone of the country.
But, and here is where we have to sort of shatter the illusion right at the start. What if I told you that that was all a fabrication? What if I told you that the British royal family is not actually British at all?
It sounds like clickbait, doesn't it?
It really does.
Or, you know, some fringe conspiracy theory you'd find on a dusty corner of the internet. But what we're dealing with today is, well, it's historical fact. It is a documented reality that the family we know as the House of Windsor is actually a German dynasty that performed the most successful corporate rebrand in history.
This is the matrix moment for this deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here centered around this investigative theme of the royal lie. And it essentially argues that the monarchy's entire identity is a constructed reality. Because as it turns out, Windsor isn't their real name. It's a stage name.
It is a pseudonym, a nom de plume, if you will. And the story of how they got that name isn't just a matter of trivia. It's a story of desperate survival. It involves a king terrified of his own subjects, a world war that turned family members against each other, the abandonment of relatives to a firing squad to save the throne, and a PR machine built to hide the bloodline.
So the premise here is what the source calls the big lie. Their blood isn't from the UK. They are, in fact, German.
Thoroughly, culturally, and genetically German. And so the mission of this deep dive is to unpack exactly how the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is their actual name, became the House of Windsor. We need to look at the mechanics of that transformation. What did it cost them? And perhaps more uncomfortably, what did it cost the people they sacrificed to keep the secret?
It's interesting you use the word sacrifice because we often think of the royals as these ceremonial figures, just waving from carriages. But this story makes them sound like political operators fighting for their lives.
That is exactly what they are. They are survivors. If you take one thing away from this discussion today, it's that the monarchy is not a static institution. It is a shapeshifter. It adapts. And in 1917, they shifted their shape because they realized that if they remained German, they would be extinct.
Okay, so let's rewind. We need to establish the baseline here.
Yeah.
If they aren't British, where do they actually come from? You mentioned Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. That sounds dense. It sounds heavy.
It's a mouthful, isn't it? To understand this, we have to go back to the 18th and 19th centuries and look at what historians sometimes call the royal factory.
The royal factory. I love that image. It sounds so industrial.
It was industrial, in a sense. Saxe-Coburg-Gotha is a tiny territory in central Germany. If you look at a map of Europe from the 1800s, it's this patchwork quilt of little duchies and principalities. Saxe-Coburg was insignificant in terms of military power or economic might. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it duchy. But the ruling family of this small place, the House of Wettin, had a strategy that was, frankly, brilliant.
Which was?
Export. They realized they couldn't conquer Europe with armies, so they decided to conquer it with weddings. They treated marriage like high-stakes diplomacy, or perhaps more accurately, like a corporate merger. Their goal was to place a Saxe-Coburg butt on every throne in Europe.
So they were basically the franchise owners of European royalty.
Franchise is a great word for it. They were the ultimate dynasty builders. They had a stud farm reputation, which sounds crude, but it's not far off. There was a figure, King Leopold I of Belgium. He was a Saxe-Coburg, and he was essentially the talent agent for the family. He was constantly writing letters, brokering deals, shipping nephews and nieces across the continent to marry into power. And the success rate was staggering. By the mid-1800s, this one obscure German family had members sitting on the thrones of Belgium, Portugal, Bulgaria, Romania, and the big prize, Britain.
And the merger for Britain happens with Queen Victoria. Now, most people think of Victoria as the ultimate symbol of British imperialism, the grandmother of Europe.
And she was culturally British. That's important. She was born in London at Kensington Palace. Her mother was German, but Victoria was raised in England. However, the turning point is 1840. She marries her first cousin, Prince Albert.
And Albert was straight from the factory.
Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Unlike Victoria, Albert was not culturally British. He was decidedly, overwhelmingly German. He spoke English with a heavy guttural accent until the day he died. He ate German food. He loved sausages and heavy stews. He brought German efficiency to the royal household.
I read somewhere that they spoke German to each other in private.
They did, especially in their intimate moments. Their love letters are peppered with German phrases. When they argued, they often argued in German. It was their private language. And because Albert was a very dominant personality, he wasn't just a consort, he was essentially the king without the title. He reshaped the British court in his image.
And he brought the traditions with him. We have to talk about the Christmas tree.
Yes, the Christmas tree. We think of it as this Dickensian ancient British tradition. It's not. It's entirely German. In Germany, bringing an evergreen into the house was a long-standing custom. In Britain, it was almost unheard of. But in 1848, the Illustrated London News published an engraving of the royal family Victoria, Albert, and their children standing around a decorated Christmas tree at Windsor Castle.
And because they were the original influencers, suddenly everyone had to have one.
Exactly. It went viral, 19th century style. Within just a few years, every middle-class home in Britain had a German Tannenbaum in the parlor. So the quintessential British Christmas centerpiece is actually a German import brought in by the very people the royals later tried so desperately to distance themselves from.
It's a beautiful irony. But here is the technicality that really matters for our story. In the British tradition, and most European traditions of the time, children take the father's name.
Right. It's a patrilineal society. So while Victoria was the last monarch of the House of Hanover, her children took Albert's name. So when Victoria died in 1901 and her son Edward VII took the throne, the British royal family officially became the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
That's the label on the tin.
That is the legal reality. King Edward VII and his son, King George V, were Saxe-Coburgs. They were a German dynasty ruling the British Empire at the height of its power. And for a long time, nobody really cared.
Why not? Why wasn't it an issue?
Because everyone was doing it. The aristocracy was international. Being British or German at that level of society didn't mean much. They were all cousins. They were a supranational cast of royals who had more in common with each other than with their own subjects in, Manchester or Munich.
But then the 20th century hits, and nationalism starts to rise. And we get to this incredible situation before World War I, which the sources call the cousinhood. I was looking at the family tree, and it's honestly a web. It's a tangle.
It was a very small world at the top. It's hard to overstate how interconnected they all were. By 1914, the monarchs of the three most powerful nations on Earth, Britain, Germany, and Russia, were all first cousins.
So we have King George V in Britain, we have Kaiser Wilhelm II in Germany, and we have Tsar Nicholas II in Russia.
Georgie, Willie, and Nicky. That's what they called each other in their letters.
It sounds like a sitcom.
It does, but a sitcom with armies. And they weren't just distant relatives who met at funerals. They were close. They spent summers together. There are photographs of them at Balmoral or in Berlin, hunting together, sailing together on their yachts.
So the resemblance between George V and Tsar Nicholas is the thing that always blows my mind. Have you seen those photos?
They look like twins. It's uncanny. They had the same beard, the same eyes, the same build. There's a famous story from the wedding of the Kaiser's daughter in Berlin in 1913, the last time they were all together before the war. George and Nicholas swapped uniforms as a joke, and their own staff couldn't tell them apart. They were confusing their own officers.
That is just baffling to think about. We learn about World War I in school as this clash of ideologies, of empires, of great power politics, but you're telling me it was essentially a family feud.
In many ways, yes. It highlights the profound absurdity of the conflict. You have millions of men mobilizing to kill each other in the mud of Flanders, while the men at the top are writing telegrams signed, "Your affectionate cousin." Kaiser Wilhelm famously said later in life that if his grandmother, Queen Victoria, had still been alive, she simply wouldn't have allowed the war to happen. She would have dragged the boys into the drawing room and knocked their heads together.
But she wasn't alive.
Yeah.
And in 1914, the powder keg explodes. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, the alliance traps trigger, and suddenly Britain is at war with Germany.
And this changes the game completely. The international cousinhood suddenly becomes a massive liability. This isn't a diplomatic spat. This is industrialized slaughter. Hundreds of thousands of British men are dying in the trenches. They're being killed by German bullets, gassed by German chemicals, shelled by German artillery.
And the domestic atmosphere in Britain turns ugly.
Ugly is an understatement. It was hysteria. You have to understand the level of anti-German sentiment that gripped the UK. It wasn't just about the Kaiser. It was about anything and everything German.
Give us some examples. What was actually happening on the streets?
Well, German shops in London were being vandalized and burned. Bakeries, butchers. If you had a German name above the door, your windows were smashed. People with German accents were attacked in the street. Orchestras stopped playing Beethoven and Bach because they were German composers.
The notes mention the dogs. That part is just incredible.
Yes, the dachshunds. People were actually kicking dachshunds in the street because they were seen as German dogs. It was a fever pitch of paranoia and hatred.
And sitting in the middle of this storm is King George V. He is looking out the window of Buckingham Palace, reading reports about the hatred of all things German. And he realizes he has a massive, massive problem.
He has a target on his back because the King of England isn't just a figurehead. He is the colonel-in-chief of the army. He's the symbol of the nation at war. And his last name is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. It's the name of the enemy.
There's a specific detail in the research about the bombers, the Gotha bombers.
This is the catalyst. This is the moment the cognitive dissonance became completely unsustainable. In 1917, Germany began air raids on London using a new type of heavy bomber called the Gotha GIV.
Named after the Gotha manufacturing plant in Germany.
Exactly. So you have these massive planes droning over London. On June 13th, 1917, they bombed a primary school in the East End, Upper North Street School. 18 children were killed. It was horrific. It shocked the nation to its core.
So the parents are pulling the bodies of their children out of the rubble, killed by Gotha bombers. And the king's name is?
Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. You can see the problem. It wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. The connection was literal. The king shared a name with the machine, killing his subjects' children.
Wow. I had not made the connection that the bomber name was the same name. That's a PR nightmare of epic proportions.
It's worse than a PR nightmare. It's an existential threat. There were whispers of republicanism. People were saying, why are we being led by a German while we fight the Germans?
Yeah.
H.G. Wells, the famous author, wrote a scathing article calling the court alien and uninspiring.
Alien? It's a loaded word.
It stung the king deeply. George V famously threw the magazine across the room and shouted, I may be uninspiring, but I'll be damned if I'm an alien. But he knew Wells was right about the perception. The damage was done.
So this brings us to the Great Rebrand. July 1917. The king is cornered. What does he do?
He summons his private secretary, Lord Stamfordham. Stamfordham is a key character here. He's the fixer. He's the ultimate courtier. The king basically says to him, we need a new name. We need to de-Germanize now.
It really is a Corbyn maneuver. Our brand is toxic. Let's change the logo.
Precisely. They didn't change the blood.
Yeah.
They didn't change the heritage. They just changed the label. But finding a name was harder than you'd think.
They brainstormed. Right. What were the options on the table?
They looked at the history books. They considered Tudor-Stuart, but that had baggage, beheadings, religious wars, not the best look. They considered Plantagenet, but that sounded a bit too medieval, too aggressive. They even considered Fitzroy, but the king rejected it immediately because Fitz implies an illegitimate son of a king.
Can't have that.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Then they considered just England, the House of England. But that sounded a bit arrogant even for them. Finally, Lord Stamfordham, who was working at Windsor Castle, had a light bulb moment.
Windsor.
It was perfect. It wasn't a family name. It was a place. But what a place. The oldest occupied castle in the world. It screams British stability. It's earthy. It's sturdy. It's Shakespearean. And crucially, it has zero foreign connection. It's as English as you can get.
So on July 17, 1917, George V makes it official.
He issues a royal proclamation. It declares that from this day forward, the family will be known as the House of Windsor. And he goes further. He orders that all German titles held by his family are relinquished. The use of Highness or Prince, derived from German states, gone, wiped from the record.
This is where we get into what the source calls the gardening.
Yes, pruning the family tree. Because it wasn't just the king who changed his name. Every relative in Britain had to anglicize.
So the Battenbergs became
Mountbatten. Prince Louis of Battenberg was the first Sea Lord, the head of the Navy, a genuine war hero. But he was hounded out of office because he was a Battenberg. So he translated his name. Berg in German means mountain. Batten means, well, batten. So Battenberg becomes Mountbatten.
It's literally just the English translation.
It is. The Duke of Teck, another German relative, became the Marquess of Cambridge. They were scrambling to find English-sounding titles to hide their identities. It was a complete whitewash.
Did the other royals in Europe notice this? I mean, I imagine the cousins were watching this unfold.
They were watching with a great deal of amusement. Kaiser Wilhelm, who was technically at war with George but still his cousin, heard the news and made a fantastic joke. He said he was looking forward to seeing the play The Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
Referencing Shakespeare's Merry Wives of Windsor, that is savage.
Exactly. It was high-level royal shade. He was saying, I see what you're doing. It's a costume change. You're just putting on a show. Everyone in the inner circle knew it was a performance, but for the average British citizen, it worked. The royal lie had been planted. The king was now a Windsor. He was British.
But there is a much darker side to this rebrand. It wasn't just about stationery and titles. There was a cost, a human cost. And this leads us to the Romanovs.
This is the part of the story that stops being funny. It stops being about branding and starts being about betrayal. We have to talk about Tsar Nicholas II.
Nikki, the twin.
The twin. By 1917, Russia is collapsing. The war has destroyed the Russian economy. The people are starving. The Russian Revolution begins. The Tsar is forced to abdicate. The Bolsheviks are taking over.
And the Romanov family, Nicholas, his wife, Alexandra, who was also Queen Victoria's granddaughter, and their 5 children, are arrested. They're prisoners.
They are in mortal danger. And naturally, they look to their cousin, the King of England, the most powerful man in the world, for help. They expect the British to send a ship to rescue them.
And initially, that was the plan, wasn't it? The government was on board.
Yes. The British government, led by Prime Minister Lloyd George, actually offered asylum. They sent a message saying, we will receive the Tsar and his family. Preparations were made. A cruiser was being ready to go and pick them up.
So what happened? Why did they die in a basement in Siberia instead of having tea in London?
The king stopped it.
George V stopped it, personally.
George V personally intervened. We have the letters from Lord Stamford to the government. The king sent instructions to the Foreign Office stating that the invitation should be withdrawn. He effectively said, do not bring them here.
I want to just pause on that for a second. His cousin, the guy he went sailing with, the guy he wrote affectionate letters to his whole life, he slammed the door in his face.
He did, and we have to ask why. It wasn't because he didn't love Nicholas. By all accounts, he did. It was fear. Cold, hard, political fear.
Fear of what? What was he so afraid of?
Fear of infection. You have to remember the context. 1917 isn't just a war. It's the rise of global socialism. There was major labor unrest in Britain. There were strikes in the shipyards. There were red flags flying in Glasgow. George V was terrified that if he brought the Tsar, who was seen by the British left as a bloody tyrant, Nicholas the Bloody, into Britain, it would spark a revolution here.
He thought that if he saved his cousin, he might lose his own throne.
Exactly. He looked at the Tsar and he saw a mirror. He saw his own potential fate. If the British people turned against the autocratic monarch from Russia, they might turn against the German monarch in London. So he made a calculation, a cold calculus. He sacrificed his family to save the institution.
That is absolutely chilling. It's like a mob boss decision. It's nothing personal. It's just business.
It was the ultimate dynastic ruthlessness. And the timeline is what makes it so haunting. George V announces the name change to Windsor on July 17, 1917.
Okay, July 17th. Got it.
Exactly 1 year later, to the very day, on July 17, 1918, the Romanovs are executed.
Whoa, wait. I did not know the dates lined up like that. The anniversary of the rebrand is the day of the murder.
It's a grim coincidence, but yes.
Right.
While George V was celebrating the first anniversary of his British identity, his cousin was being woken up in the middle of the night in Yekaterinburg.
We'll talk about that night. Because the brutality of it, it just underscores what George saved himself from, but also what he condemned them to.
It was a massacre. The family, Nicholas, Alexandra, the 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and the young son, Alexei, who was a hemophiliac, were told they were being moved to a safer location. They were herded into a basement room. They asked for chairs because the boy was weak and the empress wasn't well. Then a squad of Bolshevik secret police walked in.
And just opened fire.
They read a short death sentence and opened fire. But it didn't go smoothly. And this is a detail that relates back to their status, the daughters. They had sewn the family diamonds and jewels into their corsets and undergarments. They were trying to smuggle their wealth to safety.
So the diamonds acted like like armor.
Yes. The bullets ricocheted off the corsets. The executioners were terrified. They thought the girls were supernaturally protected, so they had to use bayonets. It was a prolonged, messy, horrific slaughter.
And George V is sitting in Windsor Castle, safe with his new English name, drinking tea, while his look-alike cousin and his entire family are being butchered.
That is the reality. The House of Windsor was founded on two pillars in 1917, a name change to hide their German roots, and the abandonment of the Romanovs to prevent revolution from spreading to Britain. It is a legacy written in blood.
That is heavy. That is really heavy. It completely reframes the whole kindly old king image. You realize that beneath the ermine robes, there's a steel backbone and a willingness to do whatever is necessary to survive.
Survival is the key word. The Windsors are survivors.
But the German connection didn't just vanish after World War I. You can change the name, but you can't change the DNA. And the German ghost comes back. And it comes back in the form of a very tall, very blonde, very handsome man, Meistermail Philip.
The ghost of Germany returns. We fast forward to 1947. Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, is young. She's head over heels in love, and she falls for Philip.
Yeah, the narrative we were sold about Philip was that he was a war hero. He was a dashing naval officer, Philip the Greek.
That was the branding. But if you scratch the surface, Philip is just as German as the rest of them, maybe more so.
But wasn't he Prince of Greece? How does that work?
He was born Prince of Greece and Denmark. But the Greek royal family, they weren't Greek, they were Germans, they were the House of Glücksburg. They had been imported to rule Greece in the 19th century because, again, the German royal factory supplied monarchs to everyone. Philip's father was German-Danish.
And his mother.
Princess Alice of Battenberg. She was born in Windsor Castle, oddly enough, but she was a Battenberg. She was from the very family that had to change their name to Mountbatten in 1917. She was Queen Victoria's great-granddaughter. So Philip and Elizabeth were cousins. Third cousins.
So he's German on both sides.
Thoroughly. English was not his first language in the nursery. He spoke German, French, and English fluently. But it gets much darker with Philip, because we aren't talking about the Kaiser anymore. We are in the 1930s and 40s. We are talking about the Nazis.
Right. And we have to be clear here. Philip fought for Britain in WWII. He was mentioned in dispatches. He was anti-Nazi.
Philip himself was. He was on the British side, but his that is a very different story. Philip had 4 older sisters. They were beautiful, aristocratic women, and in the 1930s, all 4 of them married German princes.
And these weren't just random German princes who kept their heads down during the war.
No. They were deeply connected to the rise of the Third Reich. The aristocracy in Germany, many of them, either thought Hitler could be controlled or they actively agreed with his nationalism. Philip's sisters married into the heart of the Nazi establishment.
Give it the details. Who did they marry?
His sister Sophie married Prince Christoph of Hesse. This guy wasn't just a party member. He was an SS officer. He was an Oberfuhrer in the SS. He was on Heinrich Himmler's personal staff. He was head of the Forschungsamte Nazi intelligence agency that spied on telephones.
Philip's brother-in-law was a high-ranking SS intelligence officer on Himmler's staff.
Yes. They named their eldest son Karl Adolf after Hitler. There are photos of Sophie and Christoph having lunch with Hitler. This wasn't a distant connection. This was the family circle.
And there's that photograph from 1937. That's the one that always gets me.
The funeral of his sister Cecily, she died in a plane crash. The funeral was in Darmstadt, Germany. A 16-year-old Prince Philip is walking in the procession. And if you look at the crowds lining the streets, they are giving the Heil Hitler salute. And walking alongside Philip are men in SS uniforms and Nazi regalia. Some of them are his relatives.
That is an image the palace probably keeps locked in a very, very deep vault.
They certainly don't put it on the website, but this was the reality in 1947. The war had just ended. The British public was still rationing bread. London was still full of bomb craters from the Blitz. And here is the future queen wanting to marry a man whose brothers-in-law were SS officers.
The establishment must have freaked out.
They were apoplectic. The queen mother especially famously referred to Philip as the Hun. They tried to stop the marriage. They thought it would destroy the monarchy to bring this German blood back in so soon after the war.
So they had to do the gardening again. Another rebrand.
They did. It was the rebrand 2.0. First, Philip had to become a British subject. He had to renounce his Greek and Danish titles. He had to adopt a surname. He chose Mountbatten, his mother's anglicized name.
And the wedding guest list.
Ruthless. None of Philip's sisters were invited to the wedding. His own flesh and blood. They were erased from the guest list because it would have been a PR disaster to have German princesses stepping out of cars at Westminster Abbey in 1947.
Well, Philip must have been furious about that.
He was hurt, deeply hurt, but he understood the game. He knew that for the firm to survive, the German connection had to be hidden. But then the fight continued. And this is where we get the famous battle over the name of the children.
The Mountbatten versus Windsor title fight.
Right. Philip assumed that, like any other man in 1947, his wife and children would take his name. He wanted the royal house to become the House of Mountbatten, or at least the House of Edinburgh.
Which, ironically, Mountbatten is just Battenberg translated. So he wanted to change the German name Windsor back to the anglicized German name Battenberg.
Precisely. It's two German families arguing over which English mask to wear. It's completely absurd when you think about it. But the establishment, Winston Churchill, Queen Mary, the grandmother, the courtiers, they struck back hard. They said, absolutely not. The brand is Windsor. The brand stays Windsor.
And the Queen sided with the establishment over her husband.
She had to. Duty first. She issued a proclamation that her children would be of the House of Windsor.
And Philip had that famous explosion.
He did. He shouted, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba. I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children." He felt emasculated. He felt like a stud animal brought in just to breed, while the Windsor Corporation called the shots.
That is a sting. But again, the irony is just dripping here. His name was too German for a family that was secretly German themselves.
It's the pot calling the kettle hare. But they knew that Windsor had equity. It had survived WWI. It had survived the abdication crisis. They weren't going to dilute it.
So, they secure the name. They hide the Nazi relatives. But the survival of the Windsors isn't just about hiding the past, it's about constructing a new future. You still have to sell this to the public. You need a PR strategy. And the outline calls this the PR machine, constructing the myth.
This is where the true genius of the British monarchy lies. It's not in their ruling. They don't really rule anymore. It's in their branding. After 1917, they made a conscious effort to connect with ordinary British life in a way they never had before.
They had to stop looking like distant German aristocrats and start looking like us.
Yes. They invented the royal walkabout. They started visiting factories. They started patronizing charities. But the masterstroke, the thing that saved them for the next century, was World War II.
We talked about the rebranding in WWI, but WWII is what cemented the deal.
The Blitz. This was the crucible. You have King George VI, the stammering king from the King's Speech, and Queen Elizabeth, who we know as the Queen Mother. When the bombs started falling on London in 1940, the government advised them to leave. They said, send the princesses to Canada. You go to the countryside.
And they refused.
They refused point blank. The Queen Mother issued that famous statement, "The children will not go without me. I will not leave the king, and the king will never leave."
That is the stuff of legend. That is the moment they stopped being Saxe-Coburgs and became truly British in the eyes of the people.
And then, the lucky break, if you can call it that, Buckingham Palace was bombed September 1940. A German raider dropped a stick of bombs right on the palace. The king and queen were actually there at the time.
And the Queen Mum's reaction wasn't fear.
No. She famously said, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face."
That's brilliant. I mean, whether it was calculated or spontaneous, it was a PR masterpiece. It bridged the gap between the palace and the slums.
It did. It created a bond of shared suffering. That moment did more to make them British than centuries of tradition. It washed away the German stain. They were in the rubble with the people. They were taking the same hits. That bought them 50 years of goodwill.
But the machine has to keep evolving, right? You can't run on Blitzspirit forever. And then comes the biggest threat to the royal lie since 1917, Diana.
The Diana crisis. This was a fascinating clash because it was a clash of cultures. Diana was raw. She was authentic. She was tactile. She hugged people with AIDS. She cried in public.
And the Windsors?
The Windsors are Saxe-Coburgs at heart. They are Victorian. They are stoic. They are repressed. Never complain, never explain. Their way of dealing with emotion is to suppress it. Diana exposed that coldness. She made them look like what they historically were. Stiff, foreign aristocrats who didn't understand the people.
And when she died in 1997, the machine almost broke.
It stalled. Remember the days after her death? The Queen stayed at Balmoral. She was looking after the grandsons, which was a grandmotherly thing to do, but the public didn't see it that way. They saw a cold, unfeeling institution. There was no flag flying at half-mast over Buckingham Palace because, by protocol, the royal standard only flies when the monarch is present.
And the public went nuts. Where is our queen? Why doesn't she care? Show us the flag.
The mood was revolutionary. It felt like 1917 again. The newspapers were screaming, "Show us you care," and Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, had to plead with the Queen to come down to London.
And she did, and this is the moment of the recalibration.
She came back, she walked among the flowers, she did the live broadcast, and crucially, as the coffin passed the palace, she bowed.
A monarch does not bow.
A monarch bows to no one. But she bowed to Diana's coffin. That was the submission. That was the moment the House of Windsor realized we have to adapt again. We have to become emotional. We have to perform humanity.
And since then, look at the operation. It's slick.
It is highly sophisticated. William and Harry, at least initially, opening up about mental health. Kate Middleton taking her own photos. The curated Instagram feeds. They have successfully blended the mystique of the monarchy with the relatability of a modern family.
But the core message is still the same as 1917.
The core message is, we are British, we are inevitable, we represent you. They wrap themselves in the flag so tightly that you can't see what's underneath.
So we've unpacked the history, we've seen the name change, the betrayals of the Romanovs, the hiding of the Nazis, the PR stunts, and now we have to ask the big question, the so what debate.
The philosophical question.
Yeah. I mean, playing devil's advocate here, it doesn't matter. Queen Elizabeth II was born in Mayfair. She served for 70 years. She loved Scotland. She loved corgis. She was as culturally British as it gets. Does the fact that her great-grandfather was German really change anything? Most of us have mixed ancestry. I'm sure I'm part Viking if I go back far enough.
That is the counter-argument. And it is a strong one, nurture versus nature. Culturally, the Windsors became British. They adopted the identity. Elizabeth II was the ultimate public servant. She didn't feel German.
But there's a but.
But it's about the lie. It's about the foundation of the authority. The monarchy claims legitimacy based on ancient continuity. They claim a mystical connection to the land and history of Britain. They claim to go back to Alfred the Great.
But we know that the House of Windsor was invented in a meeting room in 1917.
Exactly. The legitimacy is based on a story. And what we have learned is that the story was authored by a PR team. It's a fabrication, a successful one, but a fabrication nonetheless. It's like the ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of the ship, is it still the same ship? If you replace the British bloodline with German blood and then change the name to sound English, is it still the British monarchy?
And there is a financial implication here, too, which we can't ignore.
Huge. The British public funds this lifestyle. They pay the sovereign grant, they pay for the security, and they do it because they buy into the national myth. They believe they are supporting a uniquely British institution.
If you buy a bottle of champagne and you peel back the label and it says sparkling wine from Frankfurt, you might feel a bit cheated, even if it tastes good.
That is a perfect analogy. You are paying for the brand heritage. If the heritage is a fabrication, the value proposition changes.
It connects to the bigger picture of human nature. We don't follow logic, we follow stories.
We do. Think about the Queen's funeral. Billions of people watched. Billions. I watched, you watched?
I did. It was incredibly moving.
It was. But what were we watching? We were watching the bagpipes, the uniforms, the orb and scepter. We were mourning the end of an era. We believed we were watching the ultimate British pageant.
We weren't thinking about Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
No. We weren't thinking about the Romanovs dying in a basement. We weren't thinking about Philip's Nazi brothers-in-law. We were thinking about the Queen. And that proves the success of the rebrand. The House of Windsor is a case study in how a name change and a century of relentless PR can overwrite reality. They successfully edited history in real time.
It's impressive, terrifying, and fascinating all at once.
Right.
It shows that if you control the story, you control the reality.
History is written by the survivors, and the Windsors are the ultimate survivors.
So here is where we leave you today. We've taken you down the rabbit hole of the royal lie. But I want to leave you with a final thought, a bit of a provocation to take into your week.
Let's hear it.
If the most famous family in the world, the most scrutinized people on the planet, with paparazzi following their every move, can successfully overwrite their history, their identity, and their very name with a press release.
If they can convince the world they are one thing when they are actually another.
What other fundamental truths or national myths are we accepting without question? What other stories have we been sold by our governments, our institutions, or even our own families that are just branding?
It makes you want to look at the official story a little closer next time, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Question the narrative, always check the label. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.